and I want to say a couple of things before we get recording. All right. Thanks for coming. A couple of things. Number one, I'm wearing a mask. All staff will, we wear masks unless we can't socially distance, and Samantha and I are pretty committed to wearing masks. So you're not required to do that, but I do ask you to socially distance and be careful today as we meet, and I appreciate you coming in person. Charles is probably not going to be working with you one-on-one. He's going to be talking from 6 feet away, and so will Samantha and I. All right? And we have people joining us online. This whole thing is recorded, not only live to other people, but recorded as well. That doesn't mean you can't ask questions. That just means when you start talking about things going on, that everybody's going to hear it. So I would like you to be aware of that. All right? Thanks for coming.
Question.
Yes, Jay.
Do we need to wear that mask, or is that voluntary?
I do work for them. I have given away Hawkeye masks. I just want you to know, equal time. Go Regents Universities. Go Iowa. I will not wear Kansas, even if it's famous.
Well, I suppose we could talk about the Hawkeye football season, but that is a short conversation. Well, Iowa State could be short too. We'll find out. Again, we're going to start. My name is Charles Brown. I'm the farm management specialist for Southeast Iowa. I cover 13 counties in Southeast Iowa. I office out of Louisa, Iowa, Mahaska County. I also farm a little bit over in Wapello County, just northwest of Wetumpka, about 13 miles or so. So that's kind of where we're at today. And again, we're going to talk about the leasing and farm economy and market projections and some of those things as we go along here. Again, if you have questions, feel free to ask. This is pretty informal. Again, as Kathy mentioned, we're trying to keep our social distancing, so I'll try and stay back here, my 6 feet. It's hard for me to wear a mask and speak, so I'm not going to be doing that. Again, if you've got questions later on, I'll be glad to visit with you. This takes about 2 hours, maybe a little bit longer, see how many questions I get. We'll take a break about an hour into it. You can get up and stretch and wake back up, put the restroom if you need to. So we'll give it an hour and then take a break. Again, my contact information is on the screen. And just my email address, and that's the office phone number at Louisa. If you need my cell phone number, I'd be glad to give that to you. Again, we have people online today, and hopefully we'll get things coordinated to kind of keep things going. People online and here. This is kind of a first for me as far as actually recording and trying to do the online presentation all at the same time here. But realizing that some people couldn't make it out to meetings, and some people don't want to do the face-to-face thing, I understand that. So that's why we're doing it the way we're doing here today. Anyway. So before I get started, everybody here live anyway, you received the 3 handouts. You have the Farmland Leasing book. There's a copy of my PowerPoint presentation and a copy of the Farm Doc Daily Report, which I go to a little later on. And again, for people online, should have received an email with those copies also. So before I get started on the PowerPoint, just one thing here on the leasing book, because I do not go through it page by page, but I want to show you what the table of contents looks like to get an idea of what is in the book. So inside that first page is the table of contents. There's a section in there about legal issues dealing with leasing, tax implications of farm leases, because from income standpoint, they're treated a little bit differently than if you're actually farming. Rental income, but not subject to self-employment tax. So that's a good thing if you're retired. Information here about the conservation practices. We do a survey every year in May about case rents, and that is in the book. We have information for every county in the state of Iowa about what the average case rents are. We'll look at one of those pages here later on, but depending on what county you're in, you look at that county and see what we have information for the average case rents. It's divided into high yielding farms, middle, high yielding farms, and low yielding farms. So we'll look at that in more detail here later on. Leave that up there. We also do a survey for farmland values. That's done in November of every year, and that's in your book also. There's the information of custom rate survey. So if you're having your custom farm, for example, you could look in there, see what people are charging for planting or harvesting or different procedures. Or if you're having your CRP acres mowed, for example, information in there about custom rates for that. Also some information on what's happening with the corn, soybean prices and cost of production. I get calls every year about what's it costing my tenant, for example, to put an acre of corn in. So we have some average numbers in the book that help identify that. Doesn't mean it's what it's costing your tenant. These are some average numbers, get an idea of what it is costing to produce the crop. We'll talk about that later on here also. There's also historical information in the book about what's happened in the past. I think it goes back to even 20 years about cost of production. There are some worksheets in there towards the back of the book that talks about examples of giving you a farm operating lease. We have a 3-page form, which is in the book. We have an 11-page form that's more detailed. And each one of these you can download off of Ag Decision Maker. I'll talk about that later on also. But Ag Decision Maker is an ISU website. If you go to the internet and look at those on Ag Decision Maker, they're fillable PDF forms. You can fill them out online and then just print them off if you want to. There's also an example in the back of the book about a termination notice. I'll talk about that later on here. But the state of Iowa says that you have to serve a written termination notice if you're going to terminate your farm lease. That's either the tenant or the landlord. It has to be delivered by September the 1st, just around the corner. But again, it has to be in writing. It cannot be verbally. I had a question yesterday. A gentleman said, I've had the same tenant for 30 years, but he's going to be retiring. And what do we need to do? Well, legally, you need to serve a written termination notice. If he would not do that, for some reason that the tenant changed his mind, he would automatically have that farm for the next year. So again, it has to be a written termination notice. And again, towards the back of the book, there's some information on farm financial planning. And then the very back page of that book has some good mug shots of all of the people that work in extension that deal with the farm management. There's 8 people like me in the state. It shows each one of those back on that very back page, and also some of the state specialists that we have. And again, you can feel free to contact any one of those, even up on campus if you wish to. Lots of times, for example, if I'm on vacation, Ryan Zavetti will take care of people, my phone calls, and vice versa. So, but you don't need to call just one person. You can call anyone that you wish to. That's kind of about the leasing book. I will refer to it once or twice here during the presentation, but I want to give you an idea of what's in it. It's a good resource book. You have trouble sleeping at night, you can start reading that, and that'll help you. You go to sleep. So with that, we'll get into the PowerPoint presentation. Nancy or Nancy?
All right.
When I sit down, can they see me or not?
When you're sitting down, yes, they can
Okay.
see you. If right now what they're seeing is the PowerPoint,
Okay.
and then they have to choose to see you if they see you at all. They have to.
Well, they probably don't want to see me. A little bit about the farm economy. I think it's always good for especially landowners to get an idea what's going on with their tenants from a farm economy standpoint. And I've been the same story for the past few years. But from the USDA report that we have here, and we already peaked out income-wise back in about 2013. That was the highest net farm income that we ever had in agriculture. We call this section right in here kind of the golden years of agriculture, that 2008, 9, 10, 11, 12, where farmers really were doing really well, making a lot of profits. We had corn at $7 a bushel and beans at $15 a bushel during that time. But since that point in time, we've lost about 50% of our net farm income. So that's why you hear about, some farmers that may be struggling, or they may be calling their landowners wanting to renegotiate cash rents, usually down and not up. that standpoint. 2020 was a year they expected the net farm income to actually increase a little bit. But this was pre-COVID. This was pre-China trade disputes that we've had. This was pre-derecho windstorms and it's pre-centralized. So actually, probably for 2020, we're going to see farm income decrease even a little bit more. The other story about the farm income side of it is that in 2019, about 46% of that farmer's profits were made up by the government income. The CFAP payments, market facilitation payments, crop insurance, all the programs that were initiated because of the COVID and the China disputes that we had going on. Not a situation that farmers like to be in when they get most of their profits from the government, but that's just the way it has been for the past year. It's probably going to be that way for 2020 also. This is kind of the other side of it, looking at the farmer's balance sheets, how does that look? This is looking at the asset side of farmers. The kind of brownish bars here are real estate values. Then the bluish gray bars here are other assets. Back in here during the late 70s, we peaked out asset value-wise. Farmland values increased a lot during that point in time. And we kind of had a downturn in the early 80s, which you kind of leveled off. But since about 2000, we've been on that upturn again with asset values. So we're at record all-time high asset values right now. Most of that made up from farmland values. So that's the good news. And here's the other side of the balance sheet. You have assets and you have liabilities. Well, again, back in the 70s, we saw liabilities also ratcheting up. The farmers were borrowing money to buy some of that high-priced land back in that time. And then we had the farm prices of the 80s, which probably a lot of you are aware of. And then we saw the decrease in liabilities, kind of level back out. But now it's been on this uptick again. Primarily from 2 points. Again, land values have increased, so they've had to borrow more money to buy land. But also because the farm economy, they've been borrowing more money to buy inputs, seed, fertilizer, chemicals, paying cash rent, and so on. So we're just about at an all-time high for liabilities also, which again, probably not a good thing, because what they're concerned about right now, you look back at the asset values, what happens if land values will start to decline? Now, that has not happened. Land values have been pretty stable. We'll look at that here a little bit later on. So that's a good news thing. They've been pretty stable because of decreased interest rates, for one thing. And there still is a lot of money that was made back in that 2009, 10, 11, 12 time frame that farmers have been utilizing to purchase some farmland. So they have held up really surprisingly well, and that's maintained the farmers' balance sheets. But as I mentioned a few seconds ago, farmers are having to borrow more money to buy those inputs. And they've had trouble paying off those operating loans. So what farm lenders have been doing is say, okay, we'll take some of your equity in your land on your balance sheet, we'll move some of that operating note into your land notes, or re-amortize it over a longer period of time at lower interest rates, and that frees up some of your working capital. So that's been going on for the past about 3 to 4 years, actually. That's just about all said and done. They probably can't do much more re-amortizing farm loans because of that. And the profits have not really came back either like they should have. So that re-amortizing those operating debt into land notes works one time, but if you don't solve the profitability problem, you get the same problems 3 or 4 years down the road. So that's kind of where we're sitting right now, and operating capital has got pretty tight. Farm operations. You may have read that bankruptcies are up, and the answer is yes, they are. What I see, though, is not a lot of farmers out of business, but a lot of reorganizations going on. Maybe they had to give up some farmland, cut their acres back to maintain their operations. So a lot of those Chapter 12 type bankruptcies where they do reorganize, but not Chapter 7 where they're actually selling So how about the price for corn and soybeans, supply and demand? And again, this was before the derecho, and this was before the drought really hit pretty hard. We'll get a new one coming out here next month. So what they were reflecting here from the USDA was a 181 bushel yield on corn. I think the next report probably going to see that decrease. And probably acres harvested probably is also going to decrease, especially here for Iowa. So the demand really is held up fairly well, but they were predicting about a 2.7 billion ending stock for this 2020 crop. That's probably going to get lowered somewhat, but not as much as we would think, because worldwide and US-wide, there's still a pretty decent corn crop out there. But they were predicting 310 for the average price of the 2020 crop, whereas the 19 crop is going to come in right around 360, 358, 360 here for this 2019 crop. These prices are based on a marketing year, not a calendar. So it's September 1st to August 31st, which we're just about ending right here. So when that August 31st date hits, we'll know what the 2019 crop's going to average for sure. But again, looking around 360. Now this red number I got here, 334, this is Chad Hart's number, and he's kind of put that together based on some things that have happened since this report was taken out. So looking at a little better price than what the USDA was. And again, with the drought that we have still going on, they now say that 96% of Iowa is some method of either drought or severe drought. Western Iowa is now severe drought over in that area of the state. So that could be influencing the prices somewhat, but again, that's the state of Iowa, and we're about the only state that's really having some severe drought problems as far as corn producing goes. So 334 is kind of his price. Looking at soybeans, again, 53.3 bushel yield. That would be a record yield if we do achieve that. But again, I think because of the dry weather that we're having, that probably is not going to hit. The wind that we had that went through central Iowa did affect us somewhat, but the beans stood up a lot better than what the corn did. So USDA is predicting $8.35. Chad Hart's predicting $8.88. You watch the markets today, but beans are up over 20 cents, or were doing anyway. So the beans are kind of jumping pretty good, and China's been in there buying more soybeans. And China has some issues, it sounds like, with some drought in some areas of the country and floods in other parts of the country. You look at 2019, it's $8.55 was the paper price. So we're down somewhat from that based on USDA numbers. I expect these probably to go up a little bit with the next report. If you remember also the different farm programs farmers can sign up for the 2019 crop and 20 crop, farmers could choose to enroll in either Ark County or the PLC programs. And the PLC is a price only farm program. If the price of corn drops below 370, it triggers a payment for farm operations. Well, they were predicting 360 for the 19 crop and around 310 here for the 2020 crop. So if those figures would hold true, that would trigger some pretty big PLC payments for farm operations that pick PLC for their farm bill program. Again, I think this go around, probably most farmers pick PLC. In the 2014 Farm Bill, most farmers picked Ark County because for most of the state, that was the best program. Ark County is a revenue-based program, price times yield. For PC and PLCs, it's price only. It doesn't make any difference what the yield is. So if you look at 310 here, if that would hold true, that'd be a 60 cent per bushel payment on corn. That would hold true. Again, I think with the drought we're having, that's probably going to increase a little bit. For soybeans, the price is $8.40. Have to get below that to trigger a PLC payment. It doesn't look like for 19 that's going to happen. Probably for 2020, probably not going to happen either. That's why when I did the Farm Bill meetings last spring, but probably my opinion was probably Ark County was a better choice for soybeans and not PLC, because I didn't see where it would probably ever trigger a payment for PLC for soybeans. That's kind of holding true so far anyway. From a world standpoint, we have some pretty decent increases in supply from a world standpoint. We're at 58 million tons on a world standpoint. The United States is up 42 million tons from 2020. And that will probably drop a little bit, but from a world standpoint, almost every country is showing increases from 2019 to 20, except for a little bit of decrease here in Serbia, South Africa, and India. So again, world outlook is pretty good from a supply standpoint. Soybean production, a similar story here, looking at some pretty big increases from 19 to 20 for soybeans. Only two countries showing a decrease, and that was Canada and China out here for a decrease in soybean production. So we think about Iowa, when you look out your window and maybe you see flat corn and you see drought, but we're just kind of a small piece of the puzzle. We're looking at world supplies. It's a world market anymore. It's not just an Iowa market or a USD or a US market. Export sales, again, you can see by looking at the chart here, the green bar is 18, that blue bar is 17, and the red bar is 2019, are following similar trends as we have in past years for exports, but we're below where we were back in 2018 and 2017 also. So again, there's been some pretty decent buys here the past month or so from China, especially on corn. But again, exports are kind of lagging. Soybean export sales, a similar story, but not quite probably lagging as much as what corn is. Again, we're looking at 2019, a similar trend, and we're just about up to 2018 export levels, but still under the 2017 levels. And of course, when you see this gap in here in the charts, this was when we had the China trade disputes initiated. Basically, we didn't have any exports for that period of time. How does case rental rates follow land values? And this chart really is kind of showing that they do follow a similar trend. They have up until about 2016 here, and now we've seen really land values hold a little bit better than what the case rental values have. And again, we talked about that earlier, but our survey that we take in November showed that farmland values in Iowa average about $7,432. We showed that case rents average about $222 statewide. If you do the math there and do the division, that's about a 3% return. And that's what it's been for about the past 10 years. If you're an investor, you're getting about a 3% return by investing in farm. Is what it amounts to. We probably, back in the 2010, 11, 12, we're closer to 4% during that time. But now it's leveled out about 3%. How about the cost of production? These charts are showing corn on corn, corn on soybeans, soybeans on corn. We've got land values locked in here at 219 on this chart, but it shows that to put a crop of corn in on a per acre basis, it's going to cost that farmer about $689. Corn on soybeans a little bit less, $642 to put an acre in a corn, and for an acre of soybeans, about $488 for an acre of soybeans, cost-wise. I'm going to jump out here to for you people here live, you have a handout for Farm Doc Daily. And the reason I have this is a publication from University of Illinois. I'm not too proud, I'll steal stuff once in a while. But the reason I picked this is because they also have their cost of production in. And they have it, or be on the third page actually, but they have it for 2020 and for 2021. Of course, these are kind of projections, so we haven't finished those years out yet. But they have the price for corn at $3.25 for 2020, $3.45 for 2021, They have their land cost in there down towards the bottom at about $275 an acre for the cash rent, a little bit higher than what Iowa does. For 2020, they had about $80 an acre in there for government payments from an income standpoint. But for 2020, they're projecting the farmer losing about $32 per acre on corn. Now for 2021, they're figuring about a $64 loss for 21, but they also don't have any government payments in there for 2021 because we don't know if that's going to happen yet. Looking at soybeans for 2020, they're showing about $42 an acre profit for soybeans. For 21, losing about $26 an acre on soybeans. So these are kind of their projections. And they do have, if you look at the numbers there, they have for machinery depreciation about $62 per acre for machinery depreciation. And they have for buildings, they have in here about $11 per acre for building depreciation. And you may argue, well, those are non-cash costs. The farmers are paying that money out of his pocket. It's just a depreciation expense. But keep in mind also, our records show that farmers have invested anywhere between $500 and $600 per acre for machinery. If they're on about a 40 to 50% debt level on that machinery, their principal payments are about $60 an acre. So, and that is a cash cost. So if you look at a cash flow number, again, these figures here probably reflect pretty good about what the farmer's either making or losing. But you don't see a lot of profit in here. And there's no figures in here for buying groceries. This is just basically cost of putting the crop in, taking it out. They do have a labor cost in here, about $18 an acre. Hard labor, you could say maybe that's the farmer's labor, get paid for that. But not much in here for buying groceries, making a house payment, putting the kids through college or anything else when you take a look at these numbers. But again, these fall fairly closely to Iowa State numbers, but just wanted to show you another piece of information on this. Farm Doc Daily, if you wish to subscribe to it, they have a daily publication talking about farm economics. The University of Illinois does not have an extension service like Iowa does. They have nobody in the country like me. It's all based on campus. So the people on campus do a lot of internet type work, publications and so on. But they do a pretty good, decent publication. They have some webinars, but they've basically taken all the people out of the country and moved some of them back to campus, and some of them have worked for Iowa State. So that's Farm Doc Daily. Here's the Iowa State's numbers. Again, looking at various yields across the top, 198, 228, 320 is the price per bushel for marketing purposes. We do have our PLC payments in here about $65 an acre put in for government payments. We have some other government payments about $30 an acre, so $85 an acre we have put in here for income from government. We have our non-land cost at 420. We're using cash rent at 222. But we have the net return to farmer at 198 bushel of corn at $86. 213 average yield 134, and high yielding at $182 rate for net return. Or the break-even price at 324, 301, and 281. Again, that's about what the market was saying that we're going to get. So again, not a lot of profitability. When you take a look at this from a profit standpoint, based on these yields anyway. And again, our market should be a little higher now because of the drought, so on. But again, bad news is we're not going to have those yields either because of the drought. So when you look at some other charts here, I've varied the rents, all the other costs being the same, but at $200 an acre for case rent, from 280 to 440 bushel price wise, 150 to 230 yield wise, at 320 for your corn, you gotta have 200 bushels of corn to make $20 an acre. What it amounts to. At 250 an acre for case rent, at 320, you gotta have 210 bushels to make $2 an acre profit. Anything here that's in the pink or light red, that's what they're all minus signs, all losses. At 300 acre for case rent, at 320 for your corn, you gotta have 230 bushels to make $16 an acre profit. Now, we look at these prices here, and again, that 320 figure, 340 is probably where we're at today from the price standpoint. But from the farmer's perspective, was there an opportunity there to get a better price? And the answer is yes, there was. Every year for the past 5 years, we've had the opportunity to sell corn for $4 plus. It just happened early in the year. This year, we were probably back in that February, March timeframe. We could have contracted ahead, $4 for corn. The year before that, I think it was probably that June, July timeframe. The year before that is probably that May, June timeframe. So opportunity has been there to market corn at a profit. You just got to be ready to take advantage of it when you can. So again, from a risk standpoint and so on, marketing probably is something that we need to improve on. Here's our soybean information. And again, we're looking at 56, 60, 64 bushel yield. Again, not a lot of government payments coming in here for soybeans, about $32 an acre. Figure the RPLC and MFP CFAP payments. So net return to farmer is a minus almost $7 here for 56 bushel, plus 26 here for 60 bushel, and plus 58 here for 64 bushel beans, or break-even prices right around the 871 to 763. Again, right in there where the predicting for prices for the USDA or for so again, not really a lot of profitability in there on the soybean end of it. Similar chart here, looking at 200 an acre case rent. We've got $8.40 to $10 price wise, 35 to 75 bushel beans, 200 acre for case rent, $8.80 for soybeans, 855 bushel beans to make $18 profit. At 250, 880, 50 bushel beans, $1 profit. 300 bucks an acre for case rent, 880, 65 bushel beans at $6 profit. Again, in 2019, there were some very good bean yields. I heard farmers giving me 60 bushels to 80 bushel soybeans back in 2019. Probably not going to happen here for 2020. Probably not going to happen for these years. And again, what opportunities to market at higher prices? Yeah, we could have got over $9 for soybeans in one of those years in the past 5 years. Probably over $10 for some of them. So opportunity has been there, but isn't there today? Although the bean market is jumping today, as I mentioned earlier. This slide just kind of shows what's happened over the previous years with some of the different farm programs. We had the CFAP payment in 2020 as based on 2019 production. You got about 30 bucks an acre for corn, 12 an acre for soybeans. The market facilitation payment came in at about $67. That was just on 2019 crop also. With the 2018 Farm Bill implemented, so the RPLC payments are coming in here. But for 2019, it was about $12.75 per acre. But 2020, it looks like it could be closer to 55 bucks an acre. Soybeans not quite so much. And then also you got your crop insurance at the factory here also for those payments. So again, a lot of money being generated by the government, not so much profit generated by the markets. How do the different rental arrangements compare? Primarily, we have crop share, we have your fixed case lease, and we have your flex lease payments. And I'll talk a little more in detail about some of these here in a little bit. But up until about 2013, really the crop share rents generated more revenue for the landowner than what the case rent did or the flex lease. If you go back and probably about 20 years previous to this, crop share would have averaged better than all the other alternatives back to the landowner. But since 2013, the drop in the commodity prices, of course, crop share didn't work out so well. So that's where we've had the case leases come in here, generating better returns back to the landowner. Because the case rents have not dropped as fast as what the commodity prices did. So case rents generating more revenue back to the landowner than what crop share did. When you compare the flex lease to the others, flex lease and crop share kind of parallel one another. But again, a little bit below where the fixed case rents were. But because case rents been coming down, they're getting closer anyway to generating about the same type of income back to the landowner. Is different than what they did back previous to 2013. We have a website called Ag Decision Maker. It's part of the Iowa State University website. Anybody here use Ag Decision Maker? We got one person, that's good. But Ag Decision Maker, if you go there, there are thousands of pieces of information there about various aspects of agriculture. A lot of it deals with farm leasing. We have spreadsheets you can download. Some of it deals with the tax side of it. Some of it deals with production side of it. But again, I'm going to look at a couple of these spreadsheets here to kind of give you an idea how they work. But there's a lot of information on Ag Decision Maker. I'd really encourage you to go there if you have any questions. And again, a lot of the materials in your leasing book came right off of Ag Decision Maker. So again, at the bottom of the screen here is a website for Ag Decision. We're going to take a look at this case rental rate, C2-20, to give you an idea how the spreadsheet works and also how the different alternatives are for leasing arrangements. This is C2-20. So if you go into Ag Decision Maker, you can do a search in the top right-hand corner for C2-20, and it will go find it. And again, these are Excel spreadsheets. So on your computer, you have to have Excel as a program to be able to run these spreadsheets. If you don't have Excel, then you cannot run them. I'm going to pull this up a little bit so you can see a little bit better maybe. On the, once you download the spreadsheet, there's some tabs at the bottom down here. Got an example, what we're in right now, and you also have a blank one. So when you click on the blank one here, the same spreadsheet, you just plug in all your own numbers if you want to. And then over here, there's a data one that comes in that kicks back information back into the spreadsheet. But we're going to mess with the example here a little bit. But you're going to put in your crop acres, or how many acres you may have. I got 80 acres plugged into here. Your expected yield, I got 180 bushel plugged in here for corn, 50 bushel for soybeans. The price per bushel you're going to sell the crop at. I'm going to change the corn here. I'll make that 340. The beans are 850. I'll leave that one alone. If you want to put in the figure here for government payment, you can also do that. I've got $15 in here for that. I'll leave that alone. Then you plug in what your seed costs are, seed, fertilizer, chemicals, herbicides, and so on. All those costs on a per acre basis. You plug in your interest rate. You're going to borrow money for the crop inputs, and how long you're going to borrow the money for, how many months. Here's information for fuel, machinery ownership costs. If you're going to dry that corn, for example, you plug in numbers here for your drying costs. If you're going to be hiring some labor to put the crop in, here's your wage rate for that. Or if you want to pay yourself, you can put a figure in here for paying yourself for wage rate. We figure it takes about 2.6 hours per acre to plant corn, or about 2.25 hours per acre to plant an acre of soybeans. And how much profit do you think that you want out of those acres. I've got $50 an acre here plugged in for profit-wise for corn and soybeans. And you may think that's a lot or not enough. So it's all relative. It depends. If I'm farming 1,000 acres, I'm going to make $50 an acre profit. It's $50,000. Am I going to live on $50,000 a year? I don't think so. Not very good anyway. I'm farming full time, nobody's working off the farm. What's my health insurance going to cost me? 15, 20,000 just for health insurance. And I got to buy groceries and they have a car payment, they have a house payment, they have kids going to college. That 50,000 isn't going to go very far. That's why I tell farmers, people ask me anyway, if I want to farm full time, how many acres do I need? And I'm going to say it's probably close to 2,000 acres. If you're going to farm full time, nobody works off the farm. It's what it's going to take. You're going to be renting that ground or trying to make farm land payments on it. If the land's all bought and paid for, no, they don't take that much. If you add livestock to the operation, no, it doesn't take that much. So it all depends on how your operation is being run. But when you hear about farmers getting bigger, is there a reason why? The answer is yes. As we get those profit margins narrowed down on a per acre basis, that doesn't decrease our living expense. It takes more acres to make it work. So I'm using $50 an acre in here, but depending on the size of operation, there could be more, could be less. That's what we will leave in here. But based on those numbers, if we figure our cash rent as a share of the gross income, so here's our gross income based on 180 bushel. I think 340 a bushel. Here with the beans, this is just a gross income. And then times the percentage, that would equate to $174 per acre cash rent. Now, where did I get these percentages from? Well, I'm going to scroll back up here and there to the right here a little bit. Not too far. Here we go. Our records show us that based on average gross crop revenue, it's 2009, that the percent of cash rent is average about 29% for corn, about 39% for soybeans. So that's one way to look at cash rent. Doesn't mean you have to do it this way, but it's one way. You see corn here is varied from 21 to 33%. Beans have ranged from looks like 32 up to high of 48% for those years. But average-wise, cash rent averaged about 29% or 39% for soybeans. So based on that percentage anyway, and this gross revenue, that's what the cash rent would come out to be. The tenant's residual. This one takes into account the tenant's income and his cost of producing that crop. So we got cost involved in here now. So based on tenant's income minus his cost, he can afford to pay cash rent and maintain $50 an acre profit, $123. That's probably a lot less than what most landowners are receiving for cash rent. But based on our expenses, and the expenses probably aren't too far off, and the revenue we have in here, that's what they can afford to pay for cash rent. Now, another factor here, we can use the expected yield. So, at 180 bushel for corn, 50 bushel of soybeans, I got $1.14 per bushel in for cash rent. Now, where does that figure come from? Well, if you look at your farmland leasing book and turn to page, I think it's page 44. Yeah, page 44. You will find the different rent figures for various counties. The state of Iowa is divided into 9 cropping districts. And the Louisa County is in District 9. If you're from a different county, you'd have to find your district and look up your county in a different district. But for Louisa County, we'll just kind of go down through here real quick. We had 15 responses on our survey from Louisa County for case rents. Now you may say, well, 15, that's not very many, but that represents several thousand acres, because we have farm lenders, farm managers, farmers that report acres. There could be a farm manager reporting acres that has control of 50,000 acres, for example. So that represents several thousand acres, but just not a whole lot of responses. We say that the average corn yield for Louisa County for the past 5 years is 194 bushels. Average soybean yield is 57. The CSR2 index is 80. I'll talk more about that later. And then next line down there is your overall average case rent for Louisa County. We say the average overall was $210 an acre for Louisa County. Now the high quality third ground was 253. We had a range of 220 to 300 an acre per case. That was our range for high quality third. Now what's high quality third ground? If you go on down there to the bottom third of the sheet, you'll see that the high third from a bushel average is about 198 bushel corn, is what we consider to be high third. The middle third is about 170. The low third quality ground is about 135. That's how we determine high, medium, and low quality ground. For that medium quality ground, we said the average case rate was 234. For low quality, about 173. Now to get where I'm at here right now, in that bottom section is the average rent per 5-year average yield, or CSR2. So looking at Louisa County, we say that the average rent has been running about $1.08 per bushel. So if I go here and type in $1.08, that makes the average case rent, based on a yield perspective, about $194. The rent on soybeans is $3.68. If I type in 3.68, that's about 184. So weighted average for the corn and soybean, I make it $189 an acre for case rent based on a yield perspective. Now, how about the CSR2? If I click on the yellow bar here where it says Cass County right now, a little arrow pops up here. And if I go find Louisa County, Louisa County, and the average CSR2 is 80 for Louisa County. And I can type in 80 up here. I typed in 80, and then looking at your leasing book, there's the rent for CSR2 value for Louisa County is 263. So if I type in 2.63, that makes it 210 an acre case rent based on the CSR2 value. Also look at the market value. If the average land value in Louisa County is $9,000 an acre, I want a 3% return. Back here. That gives me 270 an acre case rent. So from an investor standpoint, you want the 3% return, the value of these farmland, and you want 270 acre for case rent. How about the crop share equivalent? So this is looking at the tenant side of it, and taking into account expenses, what's the owner's share of the income and such. I'm making about $145, almost $146 an acre case rent based on a crop share basis. So which one's right? Well, they all got their pluses and minuses. If you average them all together, you get $185 an acre. Average them all together. I'll give you my biases here now, because I already don't like the share of gross income. It's just based on income. Nothing to do with costs at all, just income. The only one that really deals with costs are two of these, That's this tenant's residual and the crop share down at the bottom. These are the only two that take into account any cost that the tenant has of producing that crop. So my bias kind of leads towards the tenant's residual, but it takes into account costs. Now, once you use a spreadsheet, the nice thing about it is you can go up here and you can change a couple of figures and recalculate everything. What if I could have sold that corn for $4 a bushel? How does that change my numbers? Well, I go back here now to my.
Can you tell me where you changed that number? I'm doing it while you do it on the spreadsheet.
Okay.
So, but where do you put the $4 in?
Up here at the top.
Yeah.
For the expected price per bushel.
Oh, instead of 340. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Done.
Okay. Sorry, Kathy.
Yep. Yep.
So that gets me here now for a tenant residual at 177. So I'm a lot closer to the other ones here now. If I could have sold that corn for $4 than what it was before. So again, none of these are approaching 300 an acre except for the center land value down here, which gets very close. This now makes it 201 for this point. From a landlord's perspective also, because I get lots of calls on cash rent. The landlord will call me and wants me to give an idea about what the cash rent should be. Well, first order from your book. So what the averages are. But then they'll say, well, I don't know, if that's right or not. I'll say, well, do you know what your yields are? The typical answer is no. I either don't have an ask or the tenant hasn't given them to me, so I don't know what the yields are. Now, you as a landlord, in your written lease, I'll talk more about this later, should have in your written lease, a clause in there that says, I need the yields every year if you harvest a crop. You're entitled to that. Not only do you need it to an idea about how productive your farmland is, but for the last two farm bills, the landowners had to know those yields in order to figure out which farm program to put the farm into. So again, I think you're entitled to it and you ought to be getting it. And I'll get kickback from tenants say, well, if I'm getting really high yields and I tell my landlord about that, he's going to raise my rent. I'm sure that probably does happen in some cases. But on the other hand, if you get good communications back and forth between you and the landowner, that really shouldn't happen. But you're entitled to it. I think you ought to have it. But they can't give me the yield, then I will ask them, okay, what's your CSRT value? And the typical answer usually is, I don't know that either. So how can you get it? Well, for your farm, there's a couple ways you can get it. You may be able to go to your county recorder's office because they have the information. They may or may not give it to you. It just depends. There's also a website you can go to. It's called Beacon, B-E-A-C-O-N. If you go to Beacon, that is the one that the county assessor's office uses. And you can find your address and your parcel of farmland, and it will tell you what the CSRT value is. Now, I'm not going to say that's 100% accurate, but it's fairly close, The most accurate way to get it is go to a different website called Web Soil Survey. And that's a USDA website. It's a similar website to what the FSA office uses to map out your fields. And when you go there, you're going to see maps just like you get from the FSA office from your fields. But if you go to Web Soil Survey, you can find your farm, you can find your fields. You take your cursor and you outline those fields, and they will tell you the exact acres in those fields. It will tell you the exact soil types in those fields and how many acres each soil type has, and the CSR2 values for the different soil types. So that's a way to get to it. If you're going to go to Web Soil Survey, though, I recommend that you first go to Ag Decision Maker. And in the top right-hand corner, you can type in CSR2. And Johannes has put together a great fact sheet, instruction sheet on how to use web soil survey. If you follow those instructions, it'll walk you right through how to calculate your CSR2 values. If you just go to web soil survey on your own, it does a whole lot more than what I just talked about. And I think you'll probably get lost because I would. So I'd first recommend you go to Ag Decision Maker and download the instruction sheet on how to use web soil survey. Question in the back.
Okay, do you feel comfortable with the accuracy of that?
Web soil survey, yes, I do, yeah. Now, it's as accurate as your hand is steady.
Sure.
When you outline those fields, if you move that cursor just a millimeter either direction, you can change the acres, by maybe an acre or two of that field. You really got to have a steady hand. But if you do it accurately, you got to match right up to your FSA maps acre-wise. So to me, that's probably the most accurate way to get it. So, yeah.
I have a question.
Sure.
If you go to your brochure, where we had the Iowa average corn cost and return,
Yeah.
I think this is a bias a little bit. It says average yield 198, above average 213, highs 228. But if you go to this survey and you go to Louisa County, it says high third is 198 bushel, middle is 170, and low is 135. Well, the average is only 170. A lot of people are getting a lot less production than that.
Some are, and again, these are averages, so there's always going to be people above and people, below that.
Okay, so the 198 would be,
Now, this
that would
198,
be the whole state, and Louisa County is only averaging 170.
well, Louisa County for the high quality third land is 198 bushels.
But the middle, which would be
That is
averaging
170.
170.
Yeah, this comes off of government reporting, where the figures come from.
Okay.
So that's what's reported to the government. Again, your farmland managed correctly and done right could be a lot higher yield than what this says. But this is what the averages are that we show.
Right.
So, but again, knowing your own yields is what you really have to know.
But if you look at those, if you look at all the counties, and you look at the middle third, people aren't doing 220 bushel an acre
No, I mean, there
for the
are,
whole state.
for the whole state, you're right. But
They're
I can,
producing less than that.
but I can name farmers that got 5-year averages at 230 bushels.
They're unusual.
It's being more common than what it used to be. Like everything else, we've seen those average yields every year increase, creeping up. So, I mean, I farm, and, if I go back 20, 30 years, I would have been happy with 125 bushels. If I can't get close to 200 now, I'm not very happy. It's because of what technology, seed, genetics, and so on, all things have changed at that point in time. So, but knowing your own yields is the best thing that you can do. I was making another comment now, I can't remember what it was. But, and the CSR2 values, again, if you don't know what that pertains to, that is the corn suitability rating. That's the ability of that soil type to raise a bushel of corn. 100 being the best, and then it goes down from there, of course. But it also depends on the management of that farm. You could take a farm that maybe is a CSR2 of 75, that's managed well, drained well, and out yield a farm that's 85, but has poor drainage and not managed very well. So management also is a big factor when you look at the farming operations. So, and again, I'll take my farm an example. I got a 60-acre field that's in a half container soil that's going to be in the high 80s CSR2. I've got some hill ground that's going to be in the mid 70s, but by using no-till and cover crops, and I put a few tile in to drain up some of the wet spots, my hill ground, almost even as good as what that good flat ground is. So, especially when you get in the wet year, it may out yield that flat ground because of what water situation. So, management, tillage, drainage are all factors in that ground. It just isn't all about the CSR2, but it's the ability. So if you take a high CSR2 piece of ground and you drain it well and you manage it right, you're gonna get those 230, 40, up to 300 bushel yield in some cases. So, but all part of management too. Any questions about this spreadsheet or CSR2s or yields or anything else? Well, we went about an hour. Let's take about a 5-10 minute break. Restrooms are to my right anyway. I think you all got some snacks and some water. You people that are online, you do what you want to, I guess. You can grab a cold or somewhere. We'll take 5 or 10 minutes and we'll come back and we'll look at another spreadsheet and we'll finish up here probably about an hour or so.
Maybe I need to do them, but I don't.
Well, let's take a quick look at it. So this is C2-21. Again, Egg Decision Maker, you can type that in, download it, and run it. It's a little bit bigger here. Oops, that's way too big. The reason I talk about flex leases, if you're talking about strictly a case rent, where's all the risk at? On the tenant, isn't it? The landlord basically has no risk. When you talk about a crop share, where's the risk at? Well, now we got more on the landowner and some on the tenant both, but a lot of landowners don't like the crop share because if there's a crop loss, for example, they don't get any rent payment, especially if they're on a fixed income and need to know a certain amount of money. So the flex lease is kind of a hybrid between the crop share and case rent. Because what a landowner is concerned about, I need to know I'm going to get at least X number of dollars. So with a flex lease, you put a base rent in. And in this case here, I've got $175 an acre put in for the base rent. No matter what happens, crop loss, whatever happens, the landowner at least gets $175 an acre. Now, based on better yields, better prices, there's an opportunity for a bonus payment, so he may get more. But this takes some of the risk off of the tenant because they don't get locked into real high case rent, but also gives the landowner a safety net in there, knowing that they're going to get X number of dollars no matter what happens. Flex leases, we're looking at more of those than what we did in the past years. Farm lenders are pushing them more on their tenants because they don't like the tenant having all the risk, for example. So we're seeing more of them. To me, they're the fairest way to rent farm ground because, again, you're shifting some of the risk off of the tenant, and so he doesn't have that real high risk factor. We have two options. We have a case rent as a percent of gross revenue. We have a case rent as a percentage of the profits. We'll take a look at both of these here. Landowners don't particularly like the flex leases, not because they don't like the flex lease, they don't like all the decisions that they have to make. Because one of the decisions is, how are you going to share in the revenue? What percentage-wise are you going to share in? So the landowner and the tenant has to agree on this percentage. We'll go back to that one chart that I showed you. You take a look at it. But usually it's around a third, 35%, somewhere in there. Beans maybe 40%. But I've got 33% in here for corn and 38% in here for soybeans. Well, I got plugged in. I got the base rent on $175 an acre. The base rent should not be the same as the going case rent. If it's going to be the same as the going case rent, why have a flex lease? So it's going to be lower. If the going case rent's $200 an acre, I'd put the base in there probably at 175, maybe a little bit lower somewhere in there. If you're talking $250 an acre for case rent, maybe the base is going to be 2 or 2 1/4 somewhere in there for the base rent. But again, that's a decision that you both have to agree on as to where to put that. Or maybe the landowner says, I have to have X number of dollars just for my cost. Maybe that's where you put it, but that's a decision that you have to make. You can also put in maximum in here. really don't see that very often, but if things could really get wild and the price of corn goes to $7 a bushel, the landowner gets limited at 350 the way I got it plugged in here. Probably not gonna happen. But you can put a maximum in here if you want to also. Now, the percent of profits works pretty similar. You put in, again, that base rent, and you put the maximum in here too if you want to. But here you get into the cost of the inputs, because now we're talking about profits. So you got to know revenue, but you also got to know the cost. So how do you get what that tenant's costs are? And I would say that probably a lot of tenants don't know what their costs are. And when you got to factor in machinery costs and fuel and so on in there, they may not know. Are you going to trust your tenant to give you what his actual costs are? So that's a factor you got to think about. I know some owners that use this, they say, well, the tenant doesn't know, we're just going to use the average Iowa State University figures. We got a sheet that's in your book you can look at and use that if you want to. I really don't see many people using percent of profit. It's a little more complicated because of the cost. Most of them that I see are using the percent of the gross revenue and not percent of profits. If you do use percent of profit, again, you got to figure out how you're going to share it. I got 30% in here and 40% I got plugged in here in my calculations. Then you plug in your acres, but then you also got to get the actual yields at harvest time. So your tenant's going to have to give you those yields. Again, you got combine monitors, you got yield maps, you got crop insurance records, numerous ways to get those. But again, you have to trust your tenant to give you those yields. And since we're talking about revenue and profits, how are we going to get the price that crop's going to be, average price for that crop? You're going to take what your tenant sold it for. Maybe he or she's a poor marketer. And doesn't sell till the day before harvest time every year, for example. Or you're going to pick, July 1st. That could be the high of the year. That could be the low of the year. So my recommendation is you're going to probably pick 4 or 5 different date points to get that price. And where's it going to come from? You're going to use futures prices. And that probably isn't that accurate because futures is futures and doesn't account for basis if you got to take it to the elevator or whatever. I would typically think you're going to use the place you would usually sell that crop at to get the price. Now here in Louisa County, you're pretty close to the river. That may be a river price. You got ethanol plant nearby, maybe an ethanol plant price, but where you typically sell that crop at. So I plug in here March, August, October, December, 1 dates. So you call the local co-op, where you paying for corn today or paying for soybeans, you plug that in, then you end up using the average price. Here it's $3.50 a bushel for corn. So you average it together to get the price. You don't pick just one day, you don't think what have to get sold for, you're going to pick the average price.
And not typically actual cash sales.
No, not typically actual cash sales, because again, could be a poor marketer, could be a really good marketer too. If you're a really good marketer, maybe you want to use actual case sales, but it doesn't always work out that way. So I would just pick some dates. That's the dates that we're going to use. I would typically pick some probably in that late spring, early summer, sometime before the 1st of July for a couple of them, because typically we get a spring rally coming up during that time. I would also probably pick a couple, towards harvest time, because we have a drought like we have here right now, for example. The price may start going up during that time. So either side of that, probably, pick some of those dates to determine that. Of course, if you pick a December 31st date, you're going to have to wait until after December 31st before you can calculate your rent payment also. So you won't know what that price is going to be. Then what do you do with the government payments, and crop insurance payments? Are you going to share those between tenant and landowner? Or is the tenant going to get all of it? Again, it's a decision that you have to make, and how you're going to share that, for example. So that's also a decision what you have to arrive at. Given the information I got plugged in here, we would have ended up $199 almost per acre for the corn land for rent, and $175 on the soybean. So we did not get anything above our base on the soybean acres, but the corn acres we did. So we averaged $187 base rent. So overall, he got above his base rent. Looking at the profit side of it, we only got $175 an acre. So we didn't gain anything by the flex lease using the profit method with the figures we got plugged into here. Again, since we have the spreadsheet, say, well, kind of gets a lot of racers, and you do what happens if? What if we had a really good year on yield, and I got 220 for my corn yield, and I got 65 bushel for my soybean yield? How does that change things? Well, if I did that, now I got 212.
How much did you put in for soybeans?
I put in
60?
65.
60.
So, there, now I got 212 an acre, so I got quite a bit above what my base rent was. If I was shooting for 200, actually I got above that. So that landlord has the opportunity in a good year to get even above what he would have got from a case rent standpoint, maybe, by utilizing this. Looking at the profit standpoint, excuse me, I took the wrong one. You got 235% of gross revenue, you got 212 based on the profitability. So you got quite a bit above his base rent, looking at the percent of gross revenue. So again, that's why we call it flex, because it flexes based on yield and prices. If again, we got a better price in here, that also would have changed things. Maybe we get this drought, maybe we get $4 corn here in December. Which, 400, that'd be good.
That's good corn.
Yeah. $4, that changed our average. So now we're at 230, almost 240 an acre for case rent based on that. So nice things about spreadsheets, change the number, does all the math for you. Again, these I think are in your workbook as hand worksheets if you want to, but spreadsheets are nice. Any questions on flex lease? I like it better personally. I know there's more decisions you have to make. But if you can make it work, I think it's fair to everybody and what just strictly case rent is, unless you're really generous and keep your case rent really low. Okay. So that was C2-21. There's also some other C2-22 and C2-30. Again, those are all an ag decision maker. You want to take a look at some of those. How about land values? What's happening with land values? This was the USDA report. This was 2019. And again, they were showing about a 0.4% decrease in 2018 from USDA report. They showed about a $7,260 per acre case rent or case land value in Iowa. We showed about $7,400. So we're a little bit different than what USDA was. This is the most recent one. This is the Federal Reserve. This is for District 7. And this shows Illinois, Indiana, Iowa, Michigan, Wisconsin. This is the 7th district average down here. But they have two dates in here, April 1st of 2020 to July 1st, 2020. From April to July, they showed Iowa decreased about 1%, but Wisconsin was up 3%. From April to July, from year to date, from July 19 to July 2020, it showed Indiana up 4%, Iowa about 0, overall up about 1% for the 7th district. So this is the most recent one that I have. Again, I think the reflection is that basically land values have held pretty stable. A little bit ups and downs, but the last couple of years, it's kind of leveled out and held pretty stable.
What are they using to establish those land sales in various?
Federal Reserve, they send surveys out for people in the business, to bankers, to auction people to get their information. I think the USDA, that's a survey that they do. The one we do through ISU is a survey that we use for ISU. Ours comes out in November. So we'll have a new one out here in November 2020. This is a Realtors Land Institute, so this is people that are in the real estate business. This is one that I use quite a bit. The reason I like it is because it breaks the land down into high quality, medium, low quality, non-tillable pasture, and timber. So you get a little more variance here. What happens with the land values? Here's southeast Iowa, and again, there's also a stretch September to March. So this was March of 2020 for the figures. We'll have another one here in September of 2020, an updated one. So this shows for high quality farmland in southeast Iowa, it was about 10,000 an acre in March, up a little bit from 2019. Medium quality was 6,900, up a little bit from 2000 from September. Low quality, a little bit at 4,600. Non-tillable pasture, 2,900, and timber about 2,400. Actually, southeast Iowa showed a 1.8% increase from September to March. Only west central in Iowa showed a 1% increase. Everybody else showed a decrease in the state of Iowa. All others here to the state. So I guess you farmers in southeast Iowa must have too much money, evidently. So again, I like this because it breaks it down. I get lots of calls about pasture and timber. And again, it's kind of relative. This shows $2,400 for timber ground. I know over in south central Iowa, at a farmer's place there, it wasn't on his farm, but it was a neighbor's farm. He sold 350 acres for $5,000 an acre, nothing but hunting rights. Oh, it was good for him, not even farmable. Guy from St. Louis bought it. So probably wasn't a farmer in St. Louis, probably somebody else. So it just depends who wants it, but the pasture, you know, usually that 4,000 to 5,000 for pasture, timber ground, 2,500 to 3,000 for timber ground. And again, your good farm ground is, I agree, it's bringing probably 10,000 or a little bit better maybe right now here in southeast Iowa. I just was talking to a gentleman during the break time that I had a farmer call me just 2 weeks ago in south central Iowa. It was offered 80 acres, 14,000 an acre. And it was either take it or leave it. Because they had buyers in place evidently.
Wow.
So
You probably got it.
I think they probably did.
But where's the rent on that now?
Well, this is the
You're
farmer
talking about
gonna
$200 an acre rent or 250.
how
How
do
do you rent that?
between 350 to 400.
You know, with a $3 card, how do you rent that?
And you don't. Now again, it's very productive farm ground. I know the area. You know, APHs are running probably 2.25 to 2.30 an acre on it. It's good farm ground. Don't get me wrong. But if you had to borrow all the money though to buy that, you would not cash flow.
No,
Yeah, would not. This shows what's happened with land values over from 1970 till now. Of course, back during the 70s, we had this uptick in land values. We had the farm depression of the 80s, and we went down, kind of leveled off. And about 2004 and 5, they're working its way back up. We peaked out here in about 2013, and we decreased up at that point in time. But again, it's kind of leveled off now. So again, it remains stable, which is good. It's farmers need it on their balance sheet that actually own the land in order to keep the equity in the balance sheets. How does the farmland values compare based on high, medium, and low quality farmland? This is District 9 here. And again, you can see that it's kind of leveled off here since 2011. Again, higher quality, the higher price, of course. But again, she's leveled off for the past few years. How about the case rents? Again, we kind of peaked out back here in 2013 at about $229 an acre. In District 9, state was about $260 or so. It looks like the state average back to that during time. Again, we kind of leveled off out here around $200 an acre for District 9. A little bit more than what the state is on District 9. Again, these are averages. There's gonna be some land a lot higher than this and some a lot lower, of course. These are averages. Anybody here running pasture? Okay, I won't talk a lot about it then. If somebody online has a question about pasture.
Well, I don't have any questions online.
And I get lots of calls about pasture, but pasture, as I tell people, is one of those things that's very variable. It depends on the quality of the pasture, the timber on it, the fences, the water, fertility. You know, is it growing up in buckbrush and thistles, and the fences need repaired every day, and you got to haul water? Typically, 45 to 80, 85 bucks an acre catches most cash pasture. So again, when people call me, their pasture's always top quality. I never have anybody say I got low quality pasture. Same with farmland too. You know, we'll ask them, how kind of land do you have? Oh, it's the best.
Yeah.
But we know that there's differences on there. And you can rent pasture either on a case rent basis or so much for animal units per month. The way to take a look at it. Or also I have someone to rent per pound of gain. I have a few farmers I work with that actually, they custom care for cattle. They have cattle come in from out of state, and they care for the cattle over their pasture. They get so much per head per day. On doing it that way.
It's treating this yardage like you want a
It's a
feedlot.
pretty good business, really. But they gotta do all the work.
You gotta do all the fences.
Yep. But we do have publications, and Ag Decision Maker, C2-23. Again, it kind of walks you through some of these different ways to look at rent on pasture. I'm not gonna go through here in any detail. Also a worksheet you can take a look at. And then we talked about communications. I've mentioned this several times during the presentation, but communication is very important between landlord and tenants, and it goes both ways. Most of the phone calls I get where there's arguments because there's been no communication. About 70% of the land is under some form of rental agreement. In some counties, in Iowa, over half the land is being rented. Case rent's about 68%. We have flexible case leases at 14%, and crop share about 17% lease standpoint. 34% of Iowa land is owned by absentee landowners with no farming experience. And I get calls from Florida, and New Jersey, and Arizona, and Colorado from people that have inherited the farmland, maybe second, third generation. They've been removed. They really don't understand agriculture. They don't understand the markets and the weather, and they want to know what's going on back in Iowa when they call me. And so if the tenant isn't communicating with those about what is going on, that's why they call me. But it's better if the tenant communicates what's going on. 23% owned by retired farmers that don't currently farm. But the owners, I think, they want to know what's going on. I have some that stop in on a yearly basis when they're back in Iowa. We just visit a little bit about the farm economy. You know, what's it costing to put a crop in, that type of thing. There are several ways to communicate: newsletters, email, Facebook, Twitter, phone calls, stop by for a cup of coffee, periodic meetings, but don't limit it to just the annual rent payment. I had a landowner here a year ago, had a tenant for 2 or 3 years. The only time she ever signed was when we paid the case rent. She has a new tenant now. Because she wanted to know what's going on, and he wouldn't tell her. So, as I tell landowners, there's lots of people wanting to rent farmland. That's not going to be a problem. Another one just called this week. The tenant not mowing the fence rows and roadways like he said he was going to. He did for the first couple of years. And now the last 2 or 3 years he got pretty lax. He's going to terminate. She's looking for a new tenant. So there's lots of ways to communicate in today's world. I have some tenants that actually maintain web pages. They have a web page. They have every landowner section on that web page, so that landowner at any time can log in to his web page. And they got pictures of the kids and pictures of the crops and information about what's going on with that. And it's just there all the time. They can always access it. Another one, the tenant he mails a couple times a year, information on what's going on in the farm operation. So in today's world, communication shouldn't be a problem. We can still write letters. My kids don't know what that is. We can also make phone calls, and again, my kids don't know what that is either. It's either a text message or Facebook or something. But communication should not be a problem in today's world. Communicate regularly. It takes time to do it. The crop reports, the growing season, keeping that farm appearance up. This goes both ways, respecting kindness towards landowners and towards tenants also. Here's just an example of a newsletter that the person puts out. Blogs are becoming more prominent in today's world. Anybody here ever heard of Millennial Farmer? Millennial Farmer has his own blog. He's a farmer in Minnesota. I would encourage you to find him if you could. He's a young farmer, younger than me anyway. He's about probably 35, 40 years old. But he does a great job running his blog. He just has 10, 15-minute video every couple of days about his farming operation. What he's doing, tractors getting stuck, combine breaking down. He had a semi set the other day, and their lot, they had spare tanks in it, and they filled the spare tanks, and they were sitting over a wet spot, settled in one corner. They had to get a big unloader to come in and pick it back up. He's a good-sized farming operation, about 3,000 acres. Nice line of machinery, nice set of buildings. He's a second generation farming with his dad. He's got over 50,000 followers on his blog. He has so many
interested in farming.
Pardon?
Surprised there's that many interested in farming.
Well, and he does it not just for farmers. A lot of people that follow him are urban people because they get an idea about what's going on with farming.
I'm surprised that they're interested.
Yeah, and that's his purpose. He's trying to get the word out about what farming really like. It's just about his everyday life, basically. He has so many followers now that he gets advertisements. And this past spring, John Deere furnished him a tractor, high-speed planter to plant all his crops with. And he was on there all the time talking about what he liked and disliked about the planter and the tractor. These are his honest opinions, But he gets other equipment being given to him now, and not to keep, but to use. To
evaluate or whatever.
Yeah, to evaluate and advertise. He's actually, yesterday, I didn't get the chance to see it, but the Farm Journal has been doing kind of a farm progress thing here all week where they have different speakers on, and he and actually Mitchell Horace from Washington County was on there yesterday just talking about what they're doing. He travels to Canada and speaking engagements and stuff, but he does just a great job, I think, of promoting agriculture and telling people what's going on. And there's other farmers doing the same thing. This is another guy here too that does something similar. But, his name is Zach Johnson, and he just does a great job. Here's an example of the Farm Lease annual report. On page 92 of your books, or these are your books. I think from the communication standpoint, producers need to know your costs, break-even points, and so on. It's not just about economic break-even, it's also about cash flow break-even. What do you need to live on, and what do you need for your principal payments that you have to make. Sharing information. And again, landowners also need to know their costs. And we're in a situation now where many landowners are pretty elderly. Some of them are in nursing homes. And nursing home costs can run $80,000, $90,000 a year. That's very common for nursing home costs. And property taxes have been going up. That's also an issue. But also farmers' profits have been going down. So how do you kind of meet the middle, I guess, when we talk about those things? We do have some sections in the book about financial planning. We have around the state of Iowa some what we call associates. They're extension employees that work with farmers that are maybe thinking about expanding, renting more ground, buying a farm, putting up home building, for example, are also working with farmers that maybe are having to downsize. Some of these are retired bankers that are our associates, but they're another set of eyes, farmers operation, that may be able to lend a hand in putting together financial statements, cash flow projections, enterprise analysis, and so on. There's no cost to the producer if they use these people. They're free. The state pays their wages. This is kind of a map showing where we have people located at. In this area, we have Jim Dane and Sarah Groletti up in Johnson County that do some of this work. Jim Dane's a retired farmer. Actually, Sarah Groletti is Ryan Groletti's wife. She actually has a master's degree in business, I believe. John Jensen also gets over this area somewhat. John Jensen is a retired banker from Knoxville. Was a banker for 30 plus years. He does a great job working with the farmers. Has some insight, from a lender standpoint, what lenders are looking for. So, again, these are free service to the farmers, no charge. We have an animal concern hotline for people who maybe need to talk to someone else, have financial troubles, and look for somebody to talk to. There's a hotline number. Again, it's free and available 24/7. We have farm lease examples. Again, some of these in the back of your book. 3-page, 11-page form. There are 3 things every lease should have on it. You should have in there, you want a copy of the yields every year. I would probably prefer a copy of the crop insurance records, because your tenant probably isn't going to lie to the crop insurance company. There's some severe penalties if they do that. Plus you get a 10-year copy of the yields when you get that. Also, you want a copy of the soil tests whenever they're taken. And that gives you an idea of whether or not the fertility is being kept up and the soil is not being mined. If you have highly erodible ground, there should be a clause in your lease that says it should be farmed according to the conservation plan on file at the FSA office. But if it's not being farmed that way, then it can kick out of the farm program. So those 3 things should be in every lease. But anything you want done, I don't care what it is, should be written down in that lease. It just saves a lot of arguments. You want the waterways mowed, it should be in the lease. You want the farm no-till, that should be in the lease. Anything you want done should be in that lease. Especially if you're related to a family member. Definitely should be in the lease. I hear more family arguments, about certain things. Just because it wasn't written down and somebody said something and we forget about it and so on. So again, you don't have to have a written lease, but strongly encouraged. There are certain times when you do need a written lease. If it's more than 1 year, it must be in writing to be enforceable. If you're going to do a 3-year lease with someone, it needs to be in writing to be enforceable. If it's a 5-year or more lease, it has to be in writing and also recorded at the county recorder's office to be a legal lease. And Iowa also has a law where it cannot be more than 20 years. That's the maximum amount you can have for a lease in Iowa is 20 years. Should a handshake be enough? I had a guy yesterday, I've had the same tenant for 30 years, it's always been verbal. It's worked out fine. And most of them do. Don't get me wrong. But think about what happens you as a landowner, you get hit by a truck tomorrow. How do your heirs know how your farm is being rented? When's the rent due? How much is due? How's the land to be taken care of and so on. Without that written lease, they don't know. Same thing true for the tenant. They get hit by a truck tomorrow. How do their heirs know when their rent is due that they have to be paying and so on? How is the profit going to be shared and so on? So it's not all about whether you trust someone or not. It's about thinking about what happens if. A lot of ifs do happen. So put things in writing. Some of the things to think about in your lease about fencing issues, especially if you're running pasture, who takes care of the fences? I mean, typically, if we're talking about repairs, The landowner will supply the materials and the tenant will supply the labor. If it's gonna be a whole new fence, that's probably gonna be the landowner's responsibility. How about hunting rights? I had a question yesterday, a meeting I was doing, hunting rights. If it's not in the lease that the landowner retains the hunting rights, the tenant is going to have the hunting rights on that. But in some parts of Iowa, especially in southern Iowa, those hunting rights can be a fairly sizable component for a lease arrangement. So again, who gets the hunting rights? Probably not so much today, but the crop residue was an issue. In central Iowa, when they were talking about using the corn stover and stuff to make ethanol out of, a lot of farmers are gearing up to bale that stover or stack it or whatever, and it got to be an issue who that stover belonged to. Well, again, it's the tenants, unless the landowner has in the lease, that he gets the stover. So again, anything that you want done or want to retain should be in that lease. Again, there's 11-page form, which has a few more details on it. Again, both of these are PDF fillable forms if you do them online. You don't have to use these. Your attorney probably has leases that they have put together. You can fill one of these out, take it to your attorney, say, here, this is what I want. You make up your own. A lot of people just use these and have everybody sign them, and that's what they use. What constitutes really a farm? This was just with a court case with a 6-acre piece of ground, had one horse on it, and the guy was trying to say this was a farm, and the court said no. It was not. How you can ensure the rent's going to get paid? Again, be sure your lease is going to be accurate. If you have the acres and legal descriptions on your lease, proper parties identified. Again, think about if somebody passes away in that lease, and maybe it goes into a trust or whatever, and you need to get the lease changed also, all the names on it. Getting assured your rent's going to be paid also. I see more and more people going to March 1st. All rent due March 1st. That puts a little bit of strain on the tenant usually. And if you're going to require that, maybe you lower your rent a little bit to allow for the interest he's going to have to probably pay to borrow the money to pay the rent. But that's the way one way to ensure you get the rent paid before the crop is put in. And I will almost guarantee you that I'll probably get a call April or May about my tenant out there putting the crop in. He hasn't paid last year's rent yet. And what do I do? Well, you should have done something a long time ago. But, the best thing you probably do is try to come to some agreement with him if possible. But you're kind of late in the ball game, when you let it go that long. The reason you want to pay March 1st is you don't let it go that long. It doesn't pay, then you got breach of contract going on here. You can do some things to find a new tenant. Another three ways here. Letter of credit, I don't really see happening much, if any. Landlord in the checks, I don't see that happening either. But I do see this more and more, the landlord's lien. You as a landlord can get a lien on your tenant's crop so that when he sells that crop, you're the first one to get paid. You're ahead of the banker, you're ahead of the co-op, you're ahead of the seed dealer, you're ahead of everybody else. Unless the tenant takes bankruptcy. Then you're a low man on totem pole.
Then the lien is void?
Yeah, it doesn't do any good if it takes bankruptcy. But in lieu of that, you are ahead of everybody else. So again, it has to be done right. It has to be what they call perfected, which means it has to be filed with the Secretary of State. You should see one form within 20 days, the lease taking effect, which leases in Iowa take effect March 1st, so by March 20th, you got to have this put in place. So, especially if you're renting to somebody that you haven't rented to before, and he's coming from 20 miles away, he's paying $50 an acre more rent than anybody else would, I would want a landlord's lien. And even if you have a tenant you've had for some time, you may not know what their financial situation really is. You can't look at their farmstead just because he has a new line of machinery and a nice farmstead saying he's well off, because he may not be. That may be all borrowed money. So I think just protection for yourself, a landlord lien is one way to go. I had some people tell me, well, I can't trust my tenant, why do I have him? True too, but again, sometimes you just don't know.
Is that something, is that a form we can fill out, or is that, you
I
have to
will
talk to
have
your
an
lawyer?
attorney do it
Or attorney?
to make it done right. If it's not done right, doesn't mean anything. I can't say you can't do it yourself, but I would have my attorney do it.
And also, is that a standing thing, or that we need to be renewed every year, or rewritten every year?
No, once you have the lease with that person, it's good for the length of
For however many,
until you have that
even
tenant.
though you only have an annual lease?
I think that's right. Question for your attorney though.
Okay.
I think that's right. Termination notice. Just because you terminate your tenant or your landowner doesn't mean you don't want that tenant or the owner for that land for the next year. You may just want more time to think about what should happen with the rent for the coming year. I have some landowners terminate every lease every year because they want to see what the yields are, prices they're doing, what the economic outlook is, to renegotiate that lease. That gives them time during the winter to think about those things. Doesn't mean they want a new tenant, and you probably want to tell your tenant when you terminate that, hey, I'm not looking for a new tenant necessarily. I want time to rethink things. So again, there's a form in your book, the sample termination notice. A lot of people just use that one. Your attorney probably has one also. Bring it back to the book. Iowa law says that it has to be a written termination notice. You cannot verbally terminate. Got to be written in writing. It cannot be just part of the lease. If you have a 1-year lease, for example, but you don't serve a written termination notice, a tenant will have that land the next year for the end of the terms of the old lease. You must terminate in writing. This is fairly new. It's probably 2 or 3 years old, and that's all in effect. It's got to be served by September the 1st. Either by, you have 2 copies and you meet with your tenant and you both sign each copy, so you both got copies, or by certified with US mail and hang on to your receipt instead of certified US mail. I've had a few owners say, I really don't want to serve it personally because my tenant may not like that when he gets it. But so they send it certified mail. But hang on to your receipt. I just had a call this week. Elderly gentleman was in and he terminated. And then he called and said, I haven't heard back from the guy. I terminated. What do I do? I said, you just keep copies of your receipts. I think I can find them. He called me back. He did find them. But hang on to the receipt. You don't have to get one sent back to you as long as you have your copy. Once you have your copy. And you can request return receipt, but as long as you got the one the post office gives you and you send to the right address, that's good. September 1st is coming right up here. Again, in the leasing book, there's a whole section there on some of the legal information about farm leases. I'm going to go through it. The Center for Ag and Law Taxation, COLT. Christine Tigran is the director of this at Iowa State. She does a great job of writing articles and keeping people up to date on what's happening with anything legally that deals with agriculture, whether it's farm leases, whether it's government programs, whether it's tax situations. But again, you can go to the COLT website, take a look at it. She does a great job in putting things together. Her and I do a tax webinar every November together, talking about the tax laws that are affecting farmers that are going on. And of course, this year, we have a lot of things going on with the different government payments and the PPP program and the idle loan and so on. That's going on. But again, a good source of information, the legal stuff with farming operations. I already talked about most of these. I'm not going to go through them again. What I did not talk about was custom farming. You as a landowner may decide to have the land just custom farmed, but that puts all the risk back on you. You're going to sell the crops, you're going to hire someone to plant it and harvest it, all the expenses. And I will tell you that over the previous 20 years, previous to about 2013, custom farming generated more return to the landowner than what anything else did, even above cash ranch or crop share. Maybe not quite so today, but it did during that time. And that is an option. have a custom farm. So if you want the risk, custom farming is the way to go. I've already went through, I think, most of this here. I'm gonna cover it again. Oops. Get towards the end here, a little bit about conservation. Iowa has what they call the nutrient reduction strategy program. So the purpose is trying to improve the waters here in Iowa, keep the runoff down, keep the nitrates and the phosphates out of the water. Everything here goes to the Mississippi, it ends up in the Gulf of Mexico. They now have the epoxy down there, or they call it the dead water down there. So trying to improve that. Again, it's all voluntary in Iowa right now. Some states it's not voluntary, some states it's mandatory. And my opinion is if we cannot control this voluntarily, it will become mandatory. The state will tell you when to put fertilizer on, how much you can apply, what kind you put on it, and so on. So if we can't control this voluntarily, I think that probably will become mandatory. What we're trying to do is stop erosion for the most part. This was a picture of northwest Iowa. I also could have looked out my window this spring, in a neighbor's field, and saw the same thing. With a 5-inch rain, and if you as the landowner should be concerned, not all from just a pollution standpoint, but what's it washing down? All your topsoil. What's your most valuable part of your farmland? It's your topsoil. If you have no topsoil, you're becoming farmland. So this topsoil also carries with it in the water, the nitrates and the phosphate. The nitrates will come through the water, the phosphate attaches to the soil, and once that gets into the streams and stuff, that's where you get the pollution from that. Again, we're looking at voluntary, science-based information that we can do, trying to reduce nitrogen and phosphate. What's our kind of framework for doing this? No-till, for example, cover crops, and so on. All those things can help improve our water quality. This is just a slide here showing kind of where we're sitting right now. We have about 8.2 million acres of no-till. We need at least about 10.5 million acres. Cover crops, we're at 973,000 acres. Need about 12.5 million acres. Not any one of these is going to satisfy our nutrient reduction strategy that we have. It's a combination of all of these. It doesn't happen in 1 year. It takes several years to put all this into place. Wetland, bioreactors, excavated buffers, prairie strips, all these can help in reducing the runoff and pollution in our waters and our streams. We put together a book called Best Practices Manual. As part of the committee that we met this past summer, looking at some of these different strategies. It's a free download off the extension website that you can get. And again, it kind of walks you through the different practices, whether it's cover crop, no-till equipment, and so on, and again, how they affect soil health, nutrient loss reduction, and habitat. So I'm not going to go through all these, but again, it's kind of an instruction manual. Also, the flow chart. If you're going to plant your crop, whether it's corn or soybeans, what's some of your best choices in trying to help control runoff and keep the nitrates and phosphates out of our water supply. So these are different flow charts. I mentioned that I farm a little bit. My big farm is 130 acres. But for me, that allows me to kind of keep in tune, with what farmers are doing. I no-till, have for over 20 years, and I also used cover crops for about 7 years. This is me planting into my cereal rye crop. This is actually about June 5th or so. And I was busy in April, couldn't get in the field. It rained pretty much all May, so I couldn't get in the field. So I did not plant any corn or beans until June this year. The same thing happened last year. If you remember, May was awful wet. It had similar conditions. My rye might have been a little bit taller this year, but not much. But we're talking about 4 feet of rye. This is my white corn bean planter. It's 1810s for soybeans and 630s for soybeans. And as you can see, pretty tall rye I'm planting into, was not sprayed ahead of time. I did not spray until after I planted green. Did the same thing I did last year, planted green into it last year. Here you can see it's done a pretty good job rolling things down. I don't have much saying after I go through it. Here's the corn coming up. Here's my soybeans coming up. Excellent stands. I have no issues whatsoever with stands. Planting that. The only issue I had was actually it was far enough along that the silver rye was shedding pollen. The pollen kept plugging up my radiator, the tractor. About every 3 hours, I had to go stop and go wash it out. I had 1,000 acres, it would have been a pain. But 130 was quite a big pain.
Say your row spacings again.
Pardon?
You plant what, 30-inch wide corn?
30-inch wide corn, 10-inch row soybeans.
10-inch.
These are 10-inch rows for soybeans. 30 inches for corn.
Kind of population on your corn?
Probably 34,000 and 150,000 soybeans. This is my corn crop for 1st of August. And here's this overview of kind of the field, 1st of August. But you can see here, so far anyway, no detriments to planting in that taller cereal rye. The same thing last year. The corn last year made 190 bushel, beans made 55 bushel last year, planted again that mid part of June. This year it may not make quite as much. We're still out, we're just terribly dry this year. Again, my corn at this time was not showing any really drought stress. Right now, about the bottom third, leaves are starting to turn and die, but the top 2/3 is still pretty green. So if I can get that inch of rain next week, that will help me.
For today.
Yeah. But the corn around me, other farmers, is pretty much brown top to bottom. It's done for. The rain's not going to help it. The beans can still help some. I didn't take any pictures of the beans this year, but they look good. We'll see what happens with the weather-wise. There's actually my planter with the bean units on it. Nothing fancy about it. Just normal planting units. I had trice clippers on the corn rows. I had to take those off because that tall cereal rye, not trice clippers, but I had spiked closing wheels. The spiked closing wheels just want to wrap. So I had to go back to the rubber wheels.
Solid, yeah.
I do have trice clippers on. But the same thing is I couldn't use them. I just raised them up. I just want to wrap in that tall cereal rye. Other than that, it's pretty much a normal planter. It is an air planter. And here's one of the detriments to planting in that tall cereal rye. You can't see what's below you. My first round in the field, these black marks, that's where it ran into my rear tractor tire.
Oh. Never the front one, right?
So I didn't go very far.
I got one.
Oh, it just punctured. It must have been laying just right. It just went right in. After it came around the tractor, dinged up my fender a little bit, but I got it straightened out. Plastic fender, so I didn't think it too bad. I tried to find, it's a nice rack. I tried to find a mate to it, but never did find it. Maybe that's a good thing.
Yeah.
You find the other tire.
Yeah. And the guy that was going to spray the next day, after I said, you ought to be thanking me because he made it right over that. He sprayed it. But yeah, it was a nice rack. I called the guys, my neighbor's boys over here on me. I said, you missed one. So that's all done. Thank you for participating. This is just a picture of my roommate from college and I a couple years ago fishing up in Canada. Typically, I go every year to Canada fishing, but not this year. Canada will not let you in. But I am headed for the boundary waters in a couple weeks. So we won't get to Canada, but we'll be awfully close to it.
I say you're knocking on the door. There's boundary
Yeah.
line.
Matter of fact, we could even probably beat Canada, not even know it. So, any questions or comments? You have my contact information on that very first slide. Feel free to call me if you do. I'm pretty much available most of the time. So, again, thanks for coming.
Thank you. Put it on.
Yep.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you. All right. Goodbye to the folks online, unless you have a question. There's no chat.
Oh,
I mean, they put nothing in the chat.
okay. That's good.
So, oh, they said thank you. All right.
Very good. Now, this is the last leasing meeting.